Hello, everybody, and welcome to FtBCon3, the third Free Thought Blogs online conference. It is 5 p.m. on Sunday, January 25th. We are coming up to the end of the conference here, but you are here for the Make Your Code of Conduct Work for You panel. We will be taking questions for this panel. We'll be taking them in the Pharyngula chat room. To get to the chat room, go to ftbcon.org. Over on the right-hand side, you will see a list of very important links. The Pharyngula chat room is the bottom of those links. And I'll give a little introduction to this panel, in part because my panelists don't entirely know even what's going to go on in this panel. Although this was based off of one of Chelsea's ideas. When we talk about codes of conduct, we really talk about harassment, and particularly sexual harassment. And as important as that is, that's not the only thing that codes of conduct are for. Not even close. And it's not the only thing that they can do. And I think people underutilize, well, organizations underutilize their codes of conduct for various things. So I was kind of out in the middle of everything in suggesting that the atheist and skeptic movements get codes of conduct in place. So I have been asked to consult on codes of conduct for, I've lost track of how many conferences, events, groups, that sort of thing. So I've seen quite a few. I've seen what they can do. And I am going to let my other panelists introduce themselves in terms of what they've had to do with codes of conduct, both in terms of talking about them and in terms of getting them in place. Michael, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, my name is, as everyone can see from the screen, Michael Damian Thomas. I am the publisher and editor-in-chief with my wife Lynn of Uncanny Magazine, which is a science fiction fantasy magazine that is published online. My own experience is that I've been a convention runner. I helped craft the code of conduct for a Chicago convention, for science fiction Chicago convention called WindyCon. And I've been involved behind the scenes at some other conventions when code of conducts got tested.
And I will say that we may not all talk about which organizations we're talking about when we bring up specific examples. It's not, our participation isn't always in front of the scenes, and we want to respect confidentiality in that respect. Chelsea, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Most of my work has been done through Campus Atheists, Skeptics, and Humanists at the University of Minnesota, specifically the SkepTech conference, which is like a critical thinking / science type conference. And I was the forerunner in putting together a task force to put together our harassment policy and make improvements and change it from like the 2 years that it ran. And now I'm associated with the Secular Women Work Conference, which we just had a panel about that today. And so we will be crafting that policy coming up soon as well. So, yeah.
And believe it or not, despite the fact that both Chelsea and I worked on the SkepTech policy, we are not just we're not just adopting it wholesale, because there are different things we want it to do. So we may talk a little bit about that later. I will also say that for the purposes of this panel, we're really not interested in debating the utility as a general in a general sense of codes of conduct and sexual harassment policies. We will take the need for them as written and talk about basically how to make them better. Now, so we've all worked with people we think have done this really well. I'm trying to do this without specifically naming names, so it's a little difficult sometimes. Yeah. What are some of the considerations that the people you've worked with who have done this well, that they have brought out, that you've appreciated, that you've thought have made their codes of conduct better?
Let's see, I can go.
Okay.
I think two things, especially when you're involving other people in making your code of conduct or looking at different ones, like basically across the board from conferences to other organized spaces / organizations. Two of the things that I have appreciated are codes of conduct that are both very, very detailed and yet very simple to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read it and it doesn't even necessarily read like a code of conduct, but you know exactly what they're talking about, that has worked really, really well because you can sort of insert the code of conduct then into a bunch of variety of spaces, rather it being a set defined code of conduct that you have to read.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is just being very appreciative of people who are able to identify a bunch of diverse groups that I normally wouldn't have even thought of that are vastly influenced by your code of conduct, and using it to be like this dynamic material that allows you to make your space better in ways that you wouldn't have pushed yourself to do not having that code of conduct.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think those are the two things that at least that I've seen that I have definitely appreciated.
Michael, how about you?
Yeah, I think a well-crafted code of conduct, when I've seen it well-crafted, it gives you it's specific enough, but it gives you enough leeway in order as an organization to deal with things. It also should, it's clear, it's concise, it's easy to find. People shouldn't have to search for your code of conduct, and in the end, having it there should create, as I think Chelsea was going with, it should create an atmosphere where your entire convention is more welcoming. It feels more diverse. It feels safe for everybody to come. And the very best organizations then start with that, because it is just the beginning. I think this, at least in the science fiction fantasy convention world, we've hit that part where most conventions now understand, most conferences, we need to have this. The big thing that's killing everybody right now is what happens when something occurs against the code of conduct or a report happens. What is the chain of command? Who reports to whom? How do we deal with something? How do we deal with the consequences for somebody who's done things? And there have now been 2 SF conventions in the last year and a half that have been completely derailed. One convention which no longer exists because of this, because they did not know what to do once somebody broke their code of conduct.
All right, I want to definitely come back to that follow-up point. But for myself, I will add that I really appreciate a code of conduct that is in many ways aspirational. That starts out by saying, and doesn't necessarily just, start with like a preamble, but crafting it comes from a place of saying, what is it that we want to get done here? Whether that's, we want everybody to have a good time, and we want to keep restrictions on that to the minimum. We want to have productive discussions on a particular thing, and then it goes and lays that out. It says, this is what we're here to do, and to that end, these are the things that we expect to see or expect not to see. And I think that really makes a code of conduct flow naturally, because frankly, if you're going to that event, you're probably on board, or you should be on board, with the goals of the event. And so it feels like, all right, so yeah, that's why we're doing this. It doesn't feel like something imposed the way that so many people seem to feel that a code of conduct is being imposed on them from above.
No, if anything, all it is stating the community standards. That we are getting together. This is what in society. These are the standards. These are the things that we do. They're the expectations when we are with each other. That these are just the standard human interaction expectations. And we believe that that everyone should do that. And if you don't, there will be some consequence.
Okay, so let's talk about follow-up. And I think almost universally this is something that people probably could plan more for. but you started this, Michael. I don't know if you want to elaborate at all. What is the minimum that you think people need to understand and have in place in terms of follow-up before they even put their code of conduct out there for people to see?
Well, I think they need to know who is there for reports. When something happens, where should people be going to report an incident? That's number one. You know, is it to security? Is it to the operations area, information area? That needs to be laid out immediately. And then when someone receives a report, how is that report then taken down? And then who follows up on investigating? And who after an investigation, who then decides what the consequences, if any, are for the individual who broke the code of, or individuals who broke the code of conduct? All of these things need to be laid out. They need to be often talked about with your lawyer for whatever your organization is, and everything needs to be vetted and figured out so that you have, when the thing happens, you have this, there is no confusion over who is supposed to be taking care of it. Is it the head of security who takes care of it? Is it the chair of that convention? Is it the chair of the next conference? Is it the board of your organization? Are they dealing with it? You need to have that laid out behind the scenes, knowing who takes which steps. How does an investigation occur? One great thing, like for instance, one convention that had a major issue, when they decided to put in these rules and did put down the process, they even went as far as having the local rape crisis center come in and train people on, and this is what harassment is, and this is what assault is, and this is how this stuff works, so that everyone from top down was on the same page about these are the things that constitute this kind of bad behavior. So this would indicate your code of conduct has been broken. You know, this is the kind of stuff which is you need in place, because, as I said, it's one thing to have that code in place, but when the event happens, if you are not ready to deal with it, you could see an end to your conference. That could, and that's it has now officially ended an SF conference because they were not prepared to deal with the repercussions. And this is not the one you're probably thinking of. It's a different one. But go on.
No, actually, I think I'm thinking of that one, but that's
okay.
Only because I follow this stuff.
All right.
And I will say, for people who are concerned about the legal aspects of this, I would refer people back to last FtBCon. We had Ken White, who blogs at Popat, talk to us about legal considerations in harassment. And it's a really, really useful video, and there is a transcript, and people should start there as a resource, probably even before they talk to their attorney, because frankly, if they understand the stuff before they talk to their attorney, it will cost them less to talk to their attorney.
Yes.
Yes. Chelsea, did you have anything you wanted to add to what Michael had to say?
Yeah, I want to reiterate how important having a power structure is, because when that moment happens at your conference, if you are not prepared for it, it is going to be utterly chaotic. If you are prepared for it, it's going to be marginally less chaotic. It's still going to be chaotic because somebody is doing something that they shouldn't be doing at your own conference while the conference is supposed to be being run, in a conference situation at least. And so you need to have well-defined tipping points for behavior so that the system gets triggered at the point at which it needs to be triggered. That's really important. Because usually, at least what I've seen behind the scenes at, whatever conferences I've been working with or been at, often these policies don't get triggered until it's a little bit too late. Like the horse is out of the barn, and now the barn is on fire, and you're like, well, maybe we should have locked the door. That probably would be great. And it's like ahead of time, you need to get very, very specific about which behaviors are allowed and which are not. You don't want to be cutting a Q&A person off after they've gone on for 15 minutes functionally harassing another conference goer at the event because somebody gave them a microphone. Like you need to be able to develop these quick responses in order to keep going and keep running the conference and minimizing everything that's going on in the background. So definitely knowing when to act is very difficult, but also incredibly important.
Yes.
And So there are ways of diversifying your approach, specifically in the stuff that you were talking about before, Michael, when it comes to reporting that makes that reaction faster. For example, having one method of reporting is generally a bad idea. If I'm a conference goer and I forget that one method of reporting, all of a sudden we've got a problem that is continuing to happen because I don't know who to contact or am unable to contact them. And so at SkepTech, I think we had probably 2 or 3 different methods of reporting that at least were advertised, even though there was more behind the scenes. Anything from comment boxes to really contact us on Twitter, that's the fastest response, to email, to having people wear badges, to basically anything. You want to make this a very swift reaction when it needs to happen.
And you don't have to have all of those people be completely trained in how to handle a harassment report from beginning to end. No. They just need to know how to find the right people.
Right. They need to be able to. I mean, they've been told that there's a flag. They just need to pass the flag on, and that's fine. They don't, and it's almost better that they don't evaluate at all what that flag is, because then it becomes if you've got 5 different steps to your crisis management, and they all get a veto on whether or not this is worth reporting, and one of them is a missing stair, the entire system is broken.
Yeah, I was going to say that that's probably another thing that has to be, you always have to watch out, is that many times in this process there is going to be a conflict of interest between someone on the convention side and the person who broke the code of conduct. Very likely we all like to think that the person who breaks it is this outsider who comes in and is all creeping at people, and more likely than not it is someone who has friends, lots of friends, maybe influence in the community, and it's going to come up to friends who have to now have to understand that perhaps they are not the best person to deal with this investigation or this process.
A good rule of thumb is that if your method of reporting can survive one of the organizers being the perpetrator, then it is a more robust method of reporting. It's robust enough for a conference or a space. Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, there are certain methods of reporting that help this along. Having standardized reporting I found it to be super, super, super useful because if there is a physical report in your hands, it's much more difficult to just say, but did that really happen, though, and to throw it away. I mean, if you are required to pass that sheet of paper on or file or whatever, that helps a lot. And so having an actual physical checklist in front of you, filled out either by you with the person who is filing the report, or in the hands of the person who's filing the report and they know who to give it to, that can help a lot, because a detailed record is what you need.
Yes.
I will also suggest that people remember when they're designing their process that process has to survive very often volunteers who are operating on little to no sleep. It is not the kind of thing where you want to rely on somebody's best judgment in the moment.
Yeah.
And particularly not one person's best judgment in the moment.
Unless it's something which is like really DEFCON 4, maybe we should be calling the police kind of situation.
Right. Yeah. In which case, everybody should be informed about what's going on, but also sometimes you really do need to just call the police when you think that there's an actual threat to the conference. Case in point, at one of the bigger conferences, I think it was last year or the year before, somebody was threatened with a gun. Like, that's an immediate response. That's not a would you like to fill out a report while you're being threatened with a gun? No. We're calling the cops immediately, and we're functionally we're on lockdown, or if we're not on lockdown, like we're following what the cops tell us to do, kind of thing.
So let's talk a little bit about law enforcement and security, because most of these events are even now held in hotels and places that have their own security. What kind of considerations do you want to write into your code of conduct, or at least consider when talking about dealing with security?
Well, I think you need to. I mean, if it is clearly that something illegal is happening, that we have now entered assault area, where there are threats going on, where anything like that, at that stage you need to have hotel security involved and you need the police involved. This has gone beyond your organization. This is not just so and so said some sexy Times comments at someone that were kind of gross. At this stage, this is beyond what you need to handle, and it often needs to be handled quickly, because if someone starts threatening, it may only be minutes before fists are flying or something else is going on.
And I will emphasize here that we're talking about something happening in the moment, as opposed to the concern that many people have that you might force a police report, say, of an assault after it's happened. That's a different consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess in all the situations that I've been working with, I haven't had to work with pre-existing security systems, which is kind of a bane, honestly, because we have almost very little to threaten or harass her with to make them leave. I mean, we either have to jump from "would you please leave" to literally the police are here right now, you have to leave. And usually there's a spectrum of reaction that you can have. Thankfully, when you work with the hotel, you can call hotel security and just make them show up. It doesn't even really, it doesn't even matter if you were going to call the police or not. If you need a situation solved and you need somebody, you need just a security guard to be standing by, not even to do anything, but so that the person causing the situation knows that they're there and leaves. That's really, really useful.
And important. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, and important too, because you may have kicked them out of your conference, but there are still public spaces in that facility. So you need to have the facility, whether it's a convention center or a hotel, you need the security involved after a point. If there's an assault issue going on, you don't want that person kicked out of your conference, throwing down their badge, and then sitting down in the lobby. And
they need to be gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can get kind of, I can imagine it can get kind of complicated, especially when, you're a conference that's run in a hotel, and that's the only, that's their only place to go, sort of, but they need to be gone, and so that is a whole separate source of conflict that may be occurring at the same time as, behavior number one that got them kicked out. And so being able to plan for, okay, and they technically have to get back in here to get their things. What is our policy for that, too? So we have the initial reaction to the behavior. We have us dealing with the person. And then we have the third level of just okay, after all that aftermath has been sorted out, how do we make sure that this doesn't continuously happen?
Right.
Yeah.
I will step in here and say we've been talking as though organizers are making these decisions about involving security on their own. But presumably, if you are in a place that has its own security, you are already working with them. You already have lines of communication open, and they're part of really this planning process. They understand what they'll be called in for or not called in for.
Right.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things that a code of conduct can do that are not dealing with sexual harassment and assault.
Oh, that's so much. I mean, people don't realize, because there was this gigantic, especially in the secular atheist sphere, about sexual harassment policies, and everybody seemed to forget that these are multi-dimensional documents that help you define your conference, and you, legally speaking, you have to have one. You should have one. You are making a space for people. You're responsible for that space, but you can do a lot with a policy that go beyond dealing with claims of sexual harassment, which is obviously extremely important, but one of the facets of this document. I think, at least in Skeptech's case, we ended up using it to push ourselves to be more progressive about making the space accessible in general. Whether that was defining protected classes within our conduct policy, or using it as an excuse to think about what we need to do should bad things happen. Bad things that, go beyond just if someone was to be, sexually harassed at the conference. Bad things like, what do we do if it's a Q&A session and somebody gets up for the Q&A and they're really, really racist?
Yeah.
That's if you are, under this protected class going to a conference and we want to be welcoming to you, we can't simply allow this to happen. That is not a welcoming space. It's a space where you're fighting racists. So how do we make a policy that gives us the power to police that functionally, while also giving us enough leeway to make the decision in the moment? So that's at least one thing.
No, that was actually what I was. This especially with people of color wanting them to feel safe and welcome at your in your conference convention. Yeah, racial hate speech is something which would be covered in a code of conduct. That if they do feel like there's suddenly someone who's coming up and being very angry and white supremacist during a panel or even face to face, this is something that is not acceptable and has to be laid out. This is not acceptable behavior here. Right.
I mean, you can go ahead, Steph.
For something where you have speakers, this is frankly doing them a favor. If you say some of these things out front, because if you have, let's call it an audience and speaker mismatch on these terms, that speaker is going to walk out of there with basically a social media shitstorm.
Yeah.
So laying out who your audience is and how you expect them to be treated is frankly doing your speakers a favor.
Yeah. And if you have somebody stand up and ask that racist question, it shouldn't befall the attendees to police that, because that's when mistakes are made. That's when you get one attendee who goes on a rant and targets, the wrong person or somebody even unrelated to the situation, and ends up making the space even less welcoming to the class that you were trying to protect. So if you are very public about your handling of what's going on, that eliminates a lot of functionally the organizational, not really backlash. It's sort of these side arguments that are going on that shouldn't have taken place because somebody tried to take matters into their own hands and they were bad.
So it de-escalates the situation generally, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And it creates the tone for the situation, which is something that you should be in control of the entire time. With the Q&A situation, if you take control immediately, not only are you de-escalating the situation, but you're also setting the tone for the rest of the event, which is one of the most important things for a conduct policy to do. It defines your space, it defines your goals, it defines what kind of people you expect people to be during the conference in order to get X and Y done, or X and Y community created. And if you don't have a conduct policy, you are leaving that up to whoever randomly shows up at your event, which may be a great thing, and it probably is going to be a terrible thing at some point in time. Yeah.
So you're telling me you don't want absolutely everybody to show up to your event?
Oh, shockingly, no. If your existence there means that other people have to get hurt, no. Doesn't matter how famous you are.
Yeah, and this is something where, and this is kind of, at an angle, and not exactly with code of conduct, but does come into play. Whenever you're inviting speakers, inviting guests, you really should know who they are and do a little bit of research. See, is this a person who has a history of problematic behavior? Are their viewpoints in my, with this crowd going to create tense or problematic situations? Yeah, this is, and or do they have a criminal record? There is a convention that just had somebody there who had a history of sexual assault as a guest, and then they had a sexual assault. that was very much in keeping with this person's pattern. And now they're dealing with it, and it was a horrible thing to happen, and I'm sure there will be legal ramifications because it was told to the convention committee, hey, this person who you've invited as a guest has this history, and they went ahead and did it anyway. That's the extreme, but even smaller things like, there was a well-known SF writer for years who was a Holocaust denier. And that was just playing with fire at many places. That you just don't want that person at a lot of these conventions. You really don't, because it's only if that question is asked at a panel, what happens? Do you have suddenly his fans leaping up in defense, and other people? This is not someone I would invite to my convention.
And I will say, even researching somebody, you don't necessarily get all of the background information because for very good legal reasons, some people don't want to talk about this stuff in public.
Sure.
But if you do have that code of conduct in place, and in place well before your event, you are more likely to hear about this stuff in time to do something, or to decide you're going to go ahead and do this, and you're going to contain it in this way, because frankly, sometimes you decide to do that as an organizer. You say, okay, that's a problem. That's a problem we're going to deal with, but we don't have to. Kate is very happy tonight, I can tell.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit loud here.
No worries. I like it when Kate laughs. But you decide to deal with that problem, but that is you deciding to deal with the problem as opposed to just, I have no control.
Yeah.
Because, frankly, once you know you do have control and you have liability.
Yeah.
All of this relates to, as an organizer, taking responsibility for these situations that you create. And I mean, overarching, it's remembering that you are creating a space and you need to define that space, and what happens in that space is your responsibility. If you invite, missing stayer X, who is supposedly a wonderful speaker, but because people have talked to you, you know that they have a reputation of assaulting people, and then they come to your conference because of your invitation, despite these warnings, and they assault people, that is your responsibility. That is your fault. Yeah. Because you've invited a lion to a sheep party. Like, I'm sorry. No. It's you know what he is or she is or they are. You know this. And so if that happens, now you have to deal with it, sure, but I don't trust you to deal with it either. That's when the cops need to be called on you, because it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Okay, so somehow we ended up back on the topic of sexual assault.
Well, the thing is that it may not be sexual. I mean, there are obviously other people who just often threaten people, even with physical violence. I mean, this is, that or get physically intimidating when during discussions, or during discussions do not go their way. They will suddenly just, I mean, and this has happened in the SF community where there are writers who, they start physically threatening someone with a physical attack. Not just sexual attack, but it could just be, I'm going to punch you in the face for your different ideas. And that is also something a code of conduct is supposed to prevent. No one is supposed to feel unsafe. And definitely if someone has that history of, well, this person has actually gotten into 2 fistfights in the past, you don't want them as your speaker.
Yeah.
You don't want them at your place.
And having a public, and that's important, public code of conduct does signal to other people that you're at least more amenable to not inviting these types of people in their great variety. And so that's one of the reasons why these policies also need to be public when you post them, because it's part of your responsibility as a space organizer, and you need to live up to the plan that you put in place for yourself. That's just something that you must do. Yeah.
So let's switch from looking at this through an exclusion lens, which we've been doing a lot in the last few minutes, and talk about what a code of conduct does for making, in a general sense, and not just what organizers do, but making a more inclusive space.
Well,
We have
Michael, if you want to go.
I think he is
well, I mean, the
frozen,
code of
unfortunately.
conduct.
There we go.
Okay.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're back. Start again.
Now I'm trying to remember where my thread was. Well, making an inclusive environment, you need to start thinking about what do we want as a diverse environment. How are we going to make this diverse? How does this go beyond just the code of conduct? For instance, if there is a thing in your code of conduct that people are not supposed to be like mocking people with disabilities, you also want to make sure that your facility is ADA compliant, and is close to universal design as you can get. These are things where you think from top to bottom, how do I make this inviting? And how do people feel penalized or unsafe in these spaces? How can they look? How's the code of conduct is a good signpost of, no, we're thinking about your safety. There are some conventions right now, in the SF world, cosplay is very popular. And that is something which a lot of code of conducts talk very specifically about. Cosplay is not consent, because they want to send that message specifically to cosplayers. You can come dress as you want, and you will not be harassed and touched for that.
And if you are, you have recourse.
And you have recourse. There are things here.
You have a lot of people backing you up.
Mm-hmm.
You have basically a whole conference with few exclusions of people who feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
if you
think,
want to...
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that there are probably, of the many things that your code of conduct can do for you, there are two of them that are kind of interesting to me, which is it's an excuse to engage your community, not just you're interacting with them directly, in terms of how you make the policy, who you involve when you're making the policy, to what you signal by having a certain kind of policy, because the variety of policy that you have can signal where you are in the community, which is a way for you to identify, your ideal attendee or your ideal niche, without necessarily saying, like, screw you, people who are into X, Y, Z. We don't want to see you here, because that's not welcoming either. It's a way of describing the conference to the people who are going to it, so they can appreciate and at least understand what kind of space they are stepping into, which is very important. And I think it really defines your identity as an organization and space, which is something that you should be doing throughout your organizing. But this is an excuse to do it. And I think that's usually, it's a difficult conversation to have, not because people don't want to have it, but because it can be kind of complicated sometimes when you're saying, okay, we're going to run this event. Where's the event coming from? Because you need to be able to be more than just another sci-fi conference, more than just another atheist conference, because there are a ton of those. There's no reason for that to succeed relative to the others. And so what kind of place are you going to be? Why do you exist? And so those are the kinds of questions that code of conduct policy begins to hint at answers to.
How about kinds of more aspirational things that a code of conduct can do, rather than just leaving or setting standards where we will not go below this? What can a code of conduct do to basically make a space a place where we treat each other better in general? And I will mention a specific conference for this, because this was one of the things that I was really impressed with when ReaderCon, after blowing things up, came back with a policy. They came back with a policy that was frankly aspirational. So what are some of the things that your code of conduct can do to generally improve, make your space better than the outside world, and not just by saying we're cutting off the bottom 1%?
Well, I think being specific about your goals is one of the things that a conduct policy can do. And there can be like a baseline level of behavior where you get kicked out, but really it's not about kicking people out. It's about improving the community. which comes from, a conference being open to all types. But like you can be a work in progress and still attend, kind of thinking. And I think a good code of conduct policy is open about defining who has power normally in these kinds of spaces, and we don't necessarily want that to be true because it's exclusive to that group and functionally cuts out everyone else. So here are the types of policies we're enacting to upend that power, and also have a fun space for everybody. And so in that sense, it can be very aspirational. I think in particular, conferences about race try to do this pretty well. I know there's the White Privilege Conference does this as well. And they have like a very strong approach to recognizing that in public spaces, if you are asking a question and you're a white person, you're probably going to get called on and listened to more frequently, and seem like you have more authority. So let's take steps to flip that, because that's not the way it should be. And so that's the kind of thing that something as simple as a code of conduct policy can begin to do, which is really very strong to your identity as a space.
Yeah, I think it's having it aspire to, if we respect each other's physical and social boundaries, we will have more fun. We will have better debate. We will have better discussion. We will have amazing things will happen if we are not busy being kind of crappy to each other. That just being respectful to one another, being kind of that Bill and Ted be excellent to one another thing, that we are going to get a better conference, for a better convention for everybody. This is how the neat stuff happens, because when a panel goes well, ideas are flowing back and forth, and they don't have to, and often ideas that are contradictory, but when things go well, it's not a source of conflict and horribleness. It's wow, these are some interesting ideas and things that I'm listening to and building off of. It shouldn't have that feeling of, at any moment though, this is going to become horrible conflict, and I can't trust that this person is not going to make it personal and go past my boundaries, and because that's not the way that people have fun. That's not the way interesting debate happens.
All right. Yeah, and I mentioned at the beginning of this that for the Secular Women Work Conference, which is a very largely workshop-based conference, we're not simply adopting wholesale the policy from SkepTech, which is a very panel and speaker-based conference. And part of that is because I think we want to spend some serious time talking to each other and other people about how respectful debate and disagreement and ideas that maybe on their surface sound like they conflict, but may really just elaborate. How to get all of that in one space without it blowing up, without people ending up arguing and saying that my way is the right way, that sort of thing. So that's definitely something that we want to do explicitly, and it may end up being just a few loose guidelines, but at the same time, but we want to look at it and think about it explicitly first.
Yeah, that's a good code of conduct policy will certainly make your conference or space more efficient in general, because things like racism and sexism and a whole host of other isms are exceptionally inefficient at promoting conversation. Because if you have a whole section of your attendees who aren't listened to despite their vast knowledge, what are you doing? You need to approach these problems fundamentally in order to create a happier system overall.
All right, we do have a couple of questions from the chat room. Richard asks, how do you write a policy to be sex positive but still clear about harassment and what is appropriate and inappropriate? I don't think this is hard, but it's probably worth touching on explicitly, at least briefly. Anybody really want to jump on that?
I mean, part of it is that I don't think you need to specifically I mean, unless this is a specific conference about sex or alternative lifestyles or kink conference or something like that, I don't know that that's necessary to be specific within your code of conduct that you are still sex positive. I think that this gets back to you just need to specify this is how you are respectful to each other's spaces and boundaries, that you need to respect that. Because this seems like it's edging towards the whole, if you have a code of conduct, therefore you kill, everyone will read that as there is no flirting, there is no sexy time hookups, and you have destroyed my convention, which that's not really how being sex positive works. I mean, in theory, people are being respectful and doing it in a respectful manner if they are, you know, reaching out to each other for some kind of thing beyond what the conference is. You know, so I don't think you have to state in your code of conduct, why yes, you guys can hook up at night, whatever.
Right. It almost to some degree, sometimes when you expressly state, no, we aren't trying to prevent hookups here, totally not, it gives people an out when they are behaving badly and they're looking for an excuse. Because then they can define whatever they're doing as just flirting, and no way could this conflict with the harassment policy whatsoever. What are you thinking? And so if you are simply clear about, I mean, the only way for your conference to be sex negative is simply, I don't even know if banning it is necessarily sex negative if it's the kind of space where that is not considered professionally appropriate. I mean, it really is defined by your own space, and I think most of the time making sure that you are simply saying boundaries are to be respected, consent is to be respected. Yeah. If you don't respect that, then you can get the hell out. That has no impact on whether or not you're sex positive or sex negative. That's just defining the floor. And if you want to go above and beyond that, you can do that as a conference. I don't know if you should do that in your conduct policy. Like you can, I mean, that's another key to this is a conduct policy can extend beyond the actual document itself. And sci-fi conferences can do this fairly easily. I think it's a little bit more difficult for other types of conferences simply because there's cosplaying involved. And so you can have a bunch of like informational posters up about how cosplay is not consent, which in and of themselves, that's not sex negative. That's just stating the obvious. And so I think it's better not even to get involved in the whether or not you are sex positive or sex negative discussion at certain points in the conference. And the conduct policy may be one of those points.
All right. I think that's pretty good. Lauren asked, let me go back to where she was, what kind of different types of reporting you suggest making available to people?
Okay, well, I can answer this practically because of the one skeptic at least planned to use. I think we kind of were running out of steam in volunteers at some point, so we had to nix some of them. So the obvious is having your like not security staff really, but security staff of your own volunteers in like bright orange vests walking around that people can report to directly. So human interaction is one. Of course, it's really hard to approach people if you have a bad situation or you're like a bad situation is actually happening. It's one of the reasons why so many rapes don't get reported. One of the many, but telling other people about it face to face is often very difficult if it's been violent, or even if it's just something that you don't even think is really a big deal, because you're talking to someone and that makes it more official than it necessarily feels. For example, if somebody made a comment during the, when you were walking by and you're like, is this a space for that? I don't really know. Talking to a person can make you feel like it's too big of an action. And so Things like making sure, maybe even having a Twitter account that's specific for this, dealing for it, that's advertised, that people can direct message. So through technology, email, making sure somebody's actually checking it.
Yes, that'd be the thing I would add to that.
Yeah, it's easy to set up. It's difficult to find the extra time for it to make sure that you're actually responding.
Well, especially during an event where a lot of people are running around doing things that the convention committee may not be, or conference planning committee, or they may not be checking the email as often.
Right.
So making sure that someone is checking regularly. That
I think.
Yeah, but
that's like no problem. I think that's one of the reasons why Twitter can be so great, is because you're probably going to be on Twitter anyway. I mean, at least for the conferences I've run, there's like a Twitter conversation going behind the conference at all times. And so if you're going to be on it already, people might as well poke you on that account while they're up. Of course, that means that people have to have a Twitter account, so you can't have that be your only technology-based approach for it. I think if you wanted to get fancy, you could just make a phone app for your conference, but that's a $5,000 to $12,000 solution.
Yeah, and the Twitter thing has that problem in that then you're not just reporting to someone, you're reporting to everybody following that Twitter. Following that Twitter hashtag.
Reports need to be anonymous.
Yeah.
Need to be. Otherwise, you won't get the report usually, because people don't want to rock the boat. Some people are willing to state publicly what has just happened.
Yes.
If you have that, you are lucky. You are lucky to have that attendee that is willing to do that, because either you'll get a report out of it and you know it's happening, good, or you'll say this isn't covered by a conduct policy, let's define this better for you, and that's also good. So it's only good when that happens, even if somebody is trying to troll you.
And even if it's painful when it happens.
Yeah. Even if it's painful, it is worth it to happen. It will improve you as an organization.
I mean, certainly for me, I mean, it starts with having your security, having security on the ground, or anyone who is representing the convention around the convention, any convention committee members, that they all should know that they could get a report, and let everyone know these are the people. If you see this ribbon on their badge, or if you see them in a vest or whatever, that is someone you can go to with your code of conduct problem, and that they then know where to bring you. And you especially with places that are central, like if you have an info area, if you have registration, if you have a specific ops station, if you are a con chair, division heads, whatever, that this is something where it's very clear this is a person who has something to do with the convention. Because it's very hard for people to know the code of conduct's been broken, where do I go, especially if security is not necessarily that obvious right away.
Right, and I think... Oh, you can finish.
No, go on, Chelsea.
Okay. I mean, the one last thing that I have to add, at least to this section of the conversation, is reporting is easier when people don't think that they're reporting. And one way to do this is, instead of having like your only step be an official report, which is big and scary to a lot of people, just have comment boxes. Have a public commenting system, and you'll get a lot of crap in that system, but it's easier for you to identify what somebody might not consider a violation of the policy, but is actually a violation of the policy. And then you don't even need to get them involved necessarily in order to deal with that situation. You just need to make sure that your power structure incorporates people being able to simply comment about what is happening.
And you may not be able to investigate and do much about that thing, but you at least may have now flagged a missing stair, where it's like, okay, now we can maybe we should keep a bit of an eye on this person next conference. Just on this, just kind of know that people are saying they're being a little inappropriate, for instance.
Right.
And it also gives people a chance to highlight things that maybe you're not communicating well about your code of conduct. If 5 people are doing this thing that you're pretty sure you said people shouldn't do, maybe you want to look at what you said.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of serial harassers, I mean, they live in the gray areas. They will look at the conduct, code of conduct. There are a lot of people who think I'm smarter than these rules, I'm going to get around them.
There are a lot of people who really know what they're doing, which is what you need to be prepared for. And it's a little bit scary that they know what they're doing, but they're able to do this because these systems are bad.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are out of time.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. It goes really fast when you're interested in the topic. So thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Michael. And thanks everybody who has been watching and asking questions.
Thank you for having us.